He kissed her right in front of me at our anniversary dinner, his ex-girlfriend. While guests whispered and cameras flashed, he didn't just humiliate me, he destroyed me. But what he didn't know? I wasn't just his wife. I was the woman who built his empire. And I was about to take it all back. If you've ever felt invisible, replaced, or underestimated, stay with me. Hit that like button, drop a comment telling me you're ready for this story, and subscribe because you won't believe what happens next. My name is Solène, and 5 years ago I made a choice that would eventually break me before it remade me. I gave up everything for a man who promised me the world, only to discover that in his version of the world, I was never meant to be seen. Let me take you back to the beginning, because every story of betrayal starts with love, or at least what we convince ourselves is love. I was 32, thriving in my career as a tech strategist, the kind of woman who walked into boardrooms and made men twice my age listen. I had built algorithms that revolutionized market predictions. I had patents with my name on them. I had power, respect, and a future that belonged entirely to me. Then I met Dashiell Hartwell at a conference in Milan, and everything shifted. He was magnetic, ambitious, full of dreams about transforming the real estate industry. We stayed up until 4 a.m. in that hotel lobby, mapping out strategies on napkins, and somewhere between the second bottle of wine and sunrise, I fell hard. Within a year, we were married. Within 2, I had quietly stepped back from my career to help him build his empire. I told myself it was temporary, that we were a team, that his success was our success. I became the woman behind the curtain, brokering deals, connecting him with investors, solving problems he couldn't see coming. But slowly, invisibly, I started to disappear. My name stopped appearing on documents. My ideas became his ideas. And when people asked what I did, he'd smile and say, "She supports me," like I was an accessory instead of the architect. Tonight was supposed to change that. Tonight was our 5th anniversary, and Dashiell had planned this elaborate dinner at the city's most exclusive rooftop restaurant. I convinced myself it meant something, that he was finally seeing me again. I wore the emerald dress he'd once said made me look like royalty. I rehearsed a speech in my head about us, about rebuilding what we'd lost. I walked into that restaurant with hope sitting heavy in my chest, desperate and foolish, and so incredibly blind. But from the moment we sat down, I knew something was wrong. He barely looked at me. His phone buzzed constantly, and every time it did, his face would light up in a way it hadn't for me in months. The champagne tasted bitter. The conversation felt forced. I kept reaching for his hand across the table, and he kept pulling away to check another message, offer another distracted smile. I told myself he was stressed, that business was overwhelming him, that after tonight things would be different. I had no idea that in less than an hour, my entire world would shatter in front of a room full of strangers, cameras flashing, capturing the exact moment I became invisible even to myself. She walked in like she owned the room, and maybe in some way she did. Paloma Sinclair. I recognized her immediately from the photographs Dashiell kept buried in old boxes he thought I'd never find. Blonde hair cascading in perfect waves, designer dress that probably cost more than most people's rent, and a smile that said she knew exactly what kind of chaos she was about to create. Every head turned as she glided through the restaurant, but her eyes were locked on our table. On my husband. I watched Dashiell's entire body language shift. He sat up straighter. That distant, distracted expression vanished, replaced by something I hadn't seen in so long I'd almost forgotten what it looked like: genuine joy. She reached our table and didn't even acknowledge me at first, just leaned down and kissed his cheek, her hand lingering on his shoulder like it belonged there. "Dash," she purred, and the nickname made my stomach turn. "It's been too long." He stood up. Actually stood up for her when he'd barely looked at me all evening. "Paloma, I didn't know you were coming." But his smile said otherwise. His smile said he'd been waiting for this all night. Then she finally turned to me, and her eyes did this sweep, head to toe, like she was cataloging everything lacking. "Oh, you must be the wife. Solène, right? I've heard so little about you." The insult was wrapped in silk, but I felt it like a slap. Around us, conversations dimmed. People were watching now, sensing drama, phones probably already recording. She slid into the chair next to Dashiell, uninvited, and suddenly I was the outsider at my own anniversary dinner. They fell into easy conversation, reminiscing about college, about trips to the Hamptons, about inside jokes I would never understand. And Dashiell let it happen. He laughed at her stories, leaned in when she whispered, "Forgot I existed." Then she said it. "We were so good together, Dash. Remember that summer in Santorini? We talked about our future, building something incredible together." She placed her hand over his on the table. He didn't move it away. My heart was pounding so hard I thought everyone could hear it. I tried to speak, but my throat had closed. That's when she leaned in, and before I could process what was happening, her lips were on his. Not a friendly peck. A kiss. A real kiss. The kind that makes a statement. The kind that says, he was mine first, and he's mine again. The room went completely silent. Cameras flashed. I heard gasps, whispers starting like wildfire, and Dashiell, my husband, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, he froze for just a second, then pulled back with this awkward laugh. "Paloma, you haven't changed." Not an apology, not outrage, just amusement, like I wasn't sitting right there, dying inside, like our marriage was a joke worth laughing at in front of everyone who mattered. I couldn't breathe. The emerald dress suddenly felt too tight, the room too hot, the air too thick with expensive perfume and judgment. I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the floor, the sound cutting through the whispers like a scream. "I need air," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Dashiell finally looked at me, but there was irritation in his eyes, not concern. "Don't be dramatic, Solène." It was just Paloma being Paloma. "You're overreacting, overreacting." That word hung in the air like poison. Around us, guests exchanged glances, some pitying, most entertained. Paloma smiled into her champagne glass, victorious. I walked away before the tears could fall. I refused to give them that satisfaction. The bathroom became my refuge, cold marble and harsh lighting that showed me exactly what I'd become, a woman who'd made herself so small she'd nearly disappeared. I gripped the sink, trying to steady my breathing, trying to hold together the pieces of myself that were crumbling. That's when I heard them. 2 women walked in, their voices bright with gossip, not realizing I was in the stall behind them. "Did you see that kiss?" Dashiell's clearly still in love with her. "Can you blame him? I mean, look at his wife, so plain, so boring. No wonder he needs someone like Paloma to remind him what excitement feels like." They laughed, and something inside me shattered completely. When I returned to the table, Paloma had moved into my seat. My seat. She and Dashiell were bent close together, her hand on his arm, showing him something on her phone. They looked like a couple. They looked right together in a way that made me feel like the intruder. I stood there for a moment, invisible again, before I finally spoke. "Dashiell, we're leaving." He didn't even look up. "We're in the middle of a conversation, Solène." Stop being insecure. Insecure. Another word designed to make me doubt myself, to make me the problem instead of him. Paloma turned to me with false sweetness dripping from every word. "You know, honey, maybe you should take some notes. Men like Dash need women who know how to keep them interested, women who don't let themselves go." Her eyes traveled over me again, that same dismissive sweep. "Maybe invest in a gym membership? Some personality?" And Dashiell, my husband, my partner, the man I'd built from nothing, he laughed. He actually laughed at her cruelty. That laugh was the sound of something breaking that could never be repaired. I felt it snap inside me, sharp and clean. The hurt transformed into something else entirely. Clarity. Cold, burning clarity. I picked up my clutch, stood tall, and looked at both of them with a calmness that surprised even me. "Enjoy your reunion," I said quietly. "I'm done." And I walked out of that restaurant with my head high, while cameras flashed and guests whispered and my marriage burned to ash behind me. I didn't sleep that night, I couldn't. I sat in what used to be our home office, surrounded by 5 years of memories that suddenly felt like lies. The penthouse was silent, except for the hum of my laptop and the sound of my own breathing, steady and determined. If I was going to burn this marriage down, I needed to understand exactly what I was burning. So I started digging. Bank statements, email accounts, contracts I'd signed without reading carefully because I'd trusted him. Every click revealed another crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed. The emails came first. Months of correspondence between Dashiell and Paloma, hidden in an account I'd never known existed. Casual at first. Great seeing you at the charity gala, then increasingly intimate. Plans for weekend getaways he'd told me were business trips. Photos of them at restaurants I recognized, dates that aligned perfectly with nights he'd said he was working late. But it wasn't just an affair, it was something bigger, more calculated. I found a draft merger agreement between Dashiell's company and Paloma's family business empire, a deal worth hundreds of millions. My name appeared nowhere in the documents, even though I was legally entitled to shared assets. I'd been erased from our future before I even knew there wasn't one. Then I found the text messages with his attorney. My hands trembled as I read them. Need to expedite a quiet divorce. She's emotional, might cause problems. How do we protect assets? His lawyer's response made my blood run cold. Prenup is solid, but we need to move fast before she realizes what she signed. If she gets smart and hires counsel, this gets complicated. They were planning to discard me like I was nothing, like I hadn't spent 5 years pouring myself into building his dream. But here's what Dashiell had forgotten, what he'd taken for granted so completely that he'd overlooked the one thing that would destroy him. Before we got married, when I was still Solène Mitchell and not Solène Hartwell, I'd developed 3 proprietary algorithms for predictive market analysis. Those algorithms became the backbone of Dashiell's first major development projects, the foundation of everything that came after. I'd registered the patents in my name, transferred some rights to his company as a gesture of partnership, but retained core ownership because my lawyer at the time had insisted. I'd forgotten about those documents, buried in a storage unit I hadn't opened in years. I pulled them out now, spread them across the desk. Patent registrations, intellectual property agreements, emails from investors I'd personally recruited who'd invested because of my reputation, not his. Contracts showing that I'd brokered at least 60% of his major deals, my signature on documents that proved I wasn't just his wife. I was his business partner, his strategist, his secret weapon, and he was about to learn that weapons don't disappear quietly. They explode. I made one phone call that changed everything. Bianca Hale picked up on the second ring, her voice sharp and all business even at 7 in the morning. She was legendary in legal circles, the attorney who'd dismantled 3 billionaire empires in 5 years, the woman who made powerful men sweat. I need someone who can take apart a man who thinks he's untouchable, I told her. There was a pause, then a low laugh. I've been waiting for this call. I saw the anniversary dinner footage. Everyone did. Come to my office. Bring everything. Within 48 hours, we'd built a case that would make Dashiell wish he'd never forgotten who I was. The legal filing hit like a bomb. Intellectual property theft, breach of fiduciary duty, fraud, violation of partnership agreements I'd signed when I still had the presence of mind to protect myself. But lawsuits take time, and I didn't want to wait. I wanted him to feel what I'd felt. Publicly humiliated, powerless, stripped of everything he'd built on my back. So I made more calls. Every major investor in Dashiell's company, every board member, every business partner, most of them people I'd personally brought to the table. I set up meetings, brought documentation, and told them the truth they'd never bothered to ask about. Where do you think his market predictions came from? Who do you think identified those development opportunities? I watched their faces change as they realized they'd been sold a lie. Then I went bigger. I contacted Serena Chen, an investigative journalist at the Financial Chronicle, who'd been trying to get an interview with me for years. I gave her everything. The patents, the emails, testimonials from colleagues who'd watched me architect deals while Dashel took credit, even the text messages planning my quiet disposal. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning with a headline that stopped the business world cold. The Invisible Woman, how Celine Hartwell built a billion-dollar empire her husband claimed as his own. Within hours, it was everywhere, trending on every platform, shared by thousands, dissected on financial news networks. The anniversary dinner footage resurfaced, but this time, the narrative had flipped. Now people saw what they'd missed before, the brilliant woman being humiliated by the mediocre man she'd elevated. Paloma's engagement announcement, which she'd posted the day after our dinner with a massive diamond and the caption, "Finally with the right man," became a PR nightmare. Comments flooded in calling her a homewrecker, calling him a fraud, calling them both exactly what they were. Dashel's company stock plummeted 30% in 2 days. Emergency board meetings were called. Investors demanded answers. The merger with Paloma's family collapsed when they realized associating with him would tank their own reputation. My phone rang constantly, Dashel, his lawyer, his publicist, all desperate. I ignored them all except for one. When Dashel finally got through, his voice was panicked, broken. "Celine, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake." I smiled, alone in my new apartment, finally free. "You didn't make a mistake, Dashel. You made a choice. Now live with it." Then I hung up. 6 months after I walked out of that restaurant, I stood on a stage at the National Business Summit, looking out at 2,000 faces waiting to hear my story. Not as Dashel Hartwell's wife, not as the woman who'd been humiliated and discarded, but as Celine Mitchell, founder and CEO of Elevation Strategies, the consulting firm that had become the most sought-after name in strategic development for minority-owned businesses. I'd taken everything I'd learned building someone else's empire and used it to build my own. And this time, my name was on everything. The transformation hadn't been easy. Those first weeks after leaving were brutal. Lawyers, depositions, watching my marriage dissolve in depositions and court filings. But somewhere in that destruction, I found pieces of myself I'd buried. The woman who'd walked into boardrooms fearlessly, the strategist who saw opportunities everyone else missed, the innovator who'd created algorithms that changed industries. She'd been there all along, just waiting for me to remember her. So I did. I pulled every contact I'd ever made, every favor I was owed, and I started building. Not for someone else this time. For me. Within 3 months, I had 12 clients. Within 6, I was turning people away. Forbes called me for an interview. TEDx invited me to speak. Universities wanted me to guest lecture. And the most beautiful part? Every single success was mine. My strategy, my vision, my name in bold letters. I mentored young women who reminded me of who I used to be, brilliant and hungry but taught to make themselves smaller for men who couldn't handle their light. I told them what I wish someone had told me: never diminish yourself to fit into someone else's dream. The settlement came through in my favor. Dashel was forced to acknowledge my intellectual property claims, my partnership contributions, everything he'd tried to erase. The payout was substantial, but honestly, the money mattered less than the validation. Legal documents that proved I wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, wasn't imagining my own erasure. I was the architect. Always had been. Then came the gala, a business leadership event where I was the keynote speaker, and Dashel was just another attendee trying to rebuild his shattered reputation. I saw him across the room before he saw me, and for the first time, I felt nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even satisfaction. Just indifference. When he approached me after my speech, attempting small talk, I almost pitied him. "You look well," he said, and I could hear the desperation underneath. "I am well," I replied, for the first time in years. He tried to apologize, to explain, but I stopped him. "You meant every bit of it, Dashel. But thank you. You freed me." I walked away from him one final time. And this time I wasn't running from anything. I was walking toward everything I'd always been meant to become. He'd kissed her to break me. Instead, he'd woken me up. That kiss in front of everyone, the one meant to destroy me? It was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it forced me to remember who I was before I became someone's wife. Before I made myself smaller, I wasn't just his partner, I was the architect, and now, I'm building empires on my own terms. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or betrayed, leave a comment telling me your story. Smash that subscribe button because I've got more stories of women who refuse to stay down. And remember, you are not defined by who left you. You're defined by how you rise. He thought he could replace me. He never realized I was irreplaceable.